Aloha all. Welcome to Tiki Tuesday Talks. Back again with you. We got a very special session today, very timely, to talk about the challenging situation we're going through here and what it means for the Tiki universe that we are in. I'm going to introduce everybody. This is me, Pete Nemengloski, founder of Tiki by the Sea and various other projects. Let's put everybody on here. Welcome, everybody.
Hi.
Aloha.
Can you introduce yourselves quickly?
My name is Michael Neff. I'll be speaking about bars today.
Chris
Hey,
Nice,
I'm Bob.
as always.
I'm Bob. I'm a Tiki fam.
Tiki fan.
Yeah.
I'm Aaron, coming to you from Baltimore, Maryland.
Hey, I'm Steva from Birmingham.
All right, I'm just going to drop that. Right on. Today, we are going to be discussing pandemic and the danger of losing the Tiki experience. So Michael Neff, master bartender, proprietor of the Cottonmouth Club in Houston, Texas, owner of various bars, consultant, a man who's been in the game a very long time. He's been a very active voice in this universe on these topics. So a little bit of background for everybody. Chat box and questions. If you guys are on Crowdcast, you can send us questions. You can do the same on Facebook Live. Sharing the event within Crowdcast, top right. We have a tip jar, Venmo at the Cottonmouth Club -staff. That's going to be in Crowdcast as well. Much appreciated. If you guys are in a place to contribute to help Michael and his staff in this time, would be really rad. Presentation will be about 30 to 40 minutes, cocktail session for a handful, and then questions with the Tiki fam. So a little background on Michael. Proprietor of Cottonmouth Club in Houston, opened in the last couple of years. He's been in the game 25 years and counting, making cocktails, owning, running, managing bars. He's been across a variety of spectrums of it. This is projects in New York, like Madison Square Garden, Houston, as you know, Omaha, Nebraska, etc. So a lot of different locations. With that, I will turn it over to you, sir.
Thanks, man.
Good to have you. Welcome.
It's nice to be back at Tiki by the Sea. I believe I was at the first one and every one since, with the exception of last year.
Yeah, that's a shame. You can't compete with Brother Cleve on that, but you've been to many.
Well, you know, I'm always honored to come, and I'm always honored to speak with the Tiki fam. This is it's awesome to be here. I mean, obviously the circumstances aren't what we want them to be, and we're clearly not in Wildwood, New Jersey. But yeah, I mean, what you're doing here, I think, is really important because, you know, we were just talking right now about everyone just says pivot all the time, and you know how we have to adapt our own way out of this mess. But it's, you know, I don't get angry at that because it's wrong. I get angry at it because it's right. So the fact that you're able to even still present this and gather everybody together and still kind of like try to make it into a new thing is I think important. It's an important lesson, I think, for people.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, it certainly was, we kind of resisted the idea of really holding on to the concept of doing Tiki as we love to do it in person in September. It became clear that wasn't going to be a thing.
Right.
And, you know, we wanted to find the right way to engage that still had a bit of the feeling of the approach that we take, the educational side, but knowing this is a different format, different way. Everybody's inundated with content all the time. So, you know, it was an interesting process to, like, in a matter of a couple weeks, try and go from, hey, we'll throw a happy hour to like, hey, let's do this. Let's get people on. Let's touch on a variety of the topic base that's out there, you know?
Yeah. And I think also the you know, this kind of thing will never substitute for a Tiki by the Sea in person, but much like bars themselves, you know, a virtual bar like we do every night doesn't substitute for a bar itself. We do it because it's what we have now. But I think that there's a power in it too that I think we're all discovering. So ideally, whatever second world looks like, or however you call, you know, part two of this experience, I think we will come back with a more evolved version of the stuff we do for a living, that kind of integrates this into the real world and the virtual world in a little bit more than it was before. And I mean, it was bound to happen, and it's just now is happening quicker because everything right now happens so flippin' fast.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think the vision for us is that we'll keep doing this, and we're excited to get back to in person when it's safe to do so.
Right.
But this gives us a platform to address a number of topics versus a handful of topics, and share more opinions and the like, and provide it to a wider group of people, right? So with Tiki, we're really limited by the amount of people that we can engage in the concept that we have. So I think it's, in some ways, hey, this is another example of it's a good thing that's come out of it, although clearly not the way we want to do it.
No, and it's not like, I mean, we'll just jump right in it, right? We're in a pandemic, and there's not a disaster that is more designed to be a danger and a risk and a threat to the existence of bars than this. Like, I can't think in any other kind of natural disaster, I would be open even if I were in here by myself, because part of the function of a bar is to kind of maintain the responsibilities of its communities. And one of those responsibilities is that we need to be here for people because, we're the last place to go and we're the place you can always go if someone needs something. We don't discuss that a lot, and we don't necessarily talk about it. We don't even really need to tell people. They just know, and then they come. In disasters, you need comfort. And, we started this virtual bar that we do. We live stream every night, but we did it specifically. We didn't do it for ourselves. We did it because we're like, I know there's all these people out there. They're separated. They're alone. They're scared. They're unsure of anything, and they need somebody to talk to, and they can't go to a bar. So we're going to try to bring a bar to them.
Yeah, I mean, I have to congratulate you on just the fortitude of doing that. For me, doing this once a week is enough of an effort. Kind of corralling, getting on topic, getting all the things organized, and working your life around it. So I think it's I could say for the hospitality community, thank you for that work that you do there on a regular basis. And I think it's, even if it's some of it's just airing it out, it's important, right?
Yeah, and I think that's why I called it a bar of any sort. Call it a virtual bar as if it was a thing. I don't know. That's not a thing, and I don't think it. I mean, it kind of is now, but if you approach it like that, then it makes it infinitely easier. Because at least the way I run bars, I will be open every day. We don't take Christmas off. We don't do those things. So once we started kind of thinking about it as a bar, there was like, okay, you just got to go to work. So it's a really short shift too. It's only like an hour and a half long. So you got to do some quick prep. You got some quick cleanup, but for the most part, you just sit there for an hour and figure out what to talk about, and then you're like, cool, like shift completed. But we also wanted people to have that experience as well. And it's very strange because we now have regulars that are coming from all over the country and sometimes all over the world. So they start to interact with each other. So that, I mean, but it's necessary because we need people to remember that we're here, and we need people critically to remember that we are more than just places where people get drunk. Bars are substantially more than just boxes that create drunk people. Because if you think about it, people are drinking more now than they ever have before, and they're drinking for cheaper. They're drinking at home. And, the second, in the first kind of phase of trying to reopen, I mean, I'm in Texas. We were the experiment, basically, or at least the biggest place that did it first. And the second people go back to bars, they did. And they flocked to them. And it wasn't because of the drinking, clearly because they were drinking at home. So the question becomes why. And up until now, and this has been a really academic question. So you've heard me talk many times about like let's talk about what bars are. Let's talk about our place in what's the power, etc. Right? That's for bartenders. We don't want to have that talk to the public because you don't want, so you're just like talking to magicians. You talk about your craft, but you want people to experience it. You don't want them to walk out thinking about it. You want them to feel about it. The downside of that is now that we're in danger, and substantial danger. I mean, depending on whose numbers you're looking at, probably by December, maybe 40% of the independent bars in the United States will be closed unless there's some serious intervention, and closed in a way, and they'll never come back. So, because the general public just thinks of us as that place over there that you don't tell your kids about. It's very easy for them to do what they've done to us, which is basically like shut us down, which is necessary. But, giving us no information, no guidance, no assistance, no nothing to any idea about like how we're going to survive. And, and I think a lot of that is because, there's whole grants that I can't apply for as a business owner because, they'll have assistant grants for small businesses in Harris County or the city of Houston or something, but they'll specifically say no bars, no strip clubs, and no vape shops. And I'm like, okay, great. Now we're in there with the vape shops. So, okay. But, but that's a perception issue.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I could say the same from, a spirits brand owner perspective. There is a number of grants that are out there.
Right.
That you click through all the fine print and then it's like, we're lumped into the same thing, right? As tobacco, as whatever. And then, that's another avenue that you really needed that you can't access,
I lost you for a second there, buddy.
Oh, just saying that's another avenue that we really need that you can't access, right?
Yeah, and so a lot of what I've been doing now is trying to just basically very quickly as much as possible. And this is why talking to people here is important. This is why I go on every night. This is why I put out things like these PSAs, because we are together. There's so many of us, and there's so many bars, and there's so tied up into the fabric of different communities. Just basically anchoring microeconomies all over the country. And I can see far enough into the future to see what's going to happen if all of those places go away. What's going to happen to the people, what's going to happen to the communities, what's going to happen to all the subsidiary businesses that we basically support, because we're the ones who go out and get the money from the people and everyone else gets money from us. Like, that's how it's always worked. And that goes all the way up to your states and your taxes and your schools and all the stuff. It's when all of that stuff is gone, the vacuum in that is going to be substantial. And I keep saying the blood in the water is going to, the blood in the water already is too much. And we haven't even come close to what's going to happen next.
Yeah, I think, an interesting question would be the PPP, as flawed as it was and as complicated it was. And, I have too many degrees and still had trouble understanding the
Right.
concept of it. Right. Some of the talk I've heard is like, when that ends, which is effectively now, right, the useful amount of that is coming up very soon for a number of people, or already has come.
Right.
We're going to see already a bunch of closures at that moment. I mean, what's your perspective on that? I'm sure you've had a lot of conversations, with people who got their own spots, et cetera. Like, what are you hearing on that level?
Yeah, for a lot of bars, the PPP isn't really that useful because it's based on salaries. So unless you're in a big organization, like I have a small crew, and I pay them more than I have to pay them based on minimum wage in Texas for tip workers, but we still are bartenders and we survive on tips. So it's very complicated when you're trying to project that in a way that keeps you out of jail, because you can't just make it up. But it's also not something that's easily traced. Like, any bartender who's ever tried to buy a house knows exactly the problem that I'm facing right now, because it's hard to report. It's hard to look at all the tips that come in, especially if you have any cash in your life, and then go to some agency and say, okay, I'm something other than, someone who on the books makes $10,000 a year or $15,000 a year. What I can report for the PPP for what they'll give me isn't nothing, but it's also not going to save anything, and it's also certainly not going to keep my bartenders from off unemployment, right? So a lot of bars are like that. It's just, tying things to salaries in the tipped industry just doesn't work. And, I know there's a lot of discussion now about a lot of things. And one of those is the justice of tipping and all those things. Like, that's not this conversation, but this is definitely a result of that.
Yeah, fair enough. So let's get back to the chat here.
Cool.
You're leaving us to die.
Yeah, that kind of sparked it all. Like I didn't mean to start out into advocacy on that stuff. I was just really just screaming into a camera because we were closed and we didn't know what was going to happen, and they made us open again, which was terrible. It was a terrible thing to do. We had to make terrible choices, both as bartenders and as bar owners. Because as a bar owner, we had to make the choice of saying, do I risk public safety or do I risk my own safety, the safety of my staff and the safety of my business, all the way up to the industry itself. So, the second they made us open again, and for those of you who don't know, in Texas, we're shut down just like everybody else was. And then on the Monday, Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, just announced on the radio or television or something that Friday all bars can open again. And here's the rules. And they just said some basic guidelines. They weren't even rules. And I'm like, okay, what if I wasn't watching TV that day? There's no official really anything. There was no plan for enforcement. There was no specific kind of rules or guidelines based on place. They just said, okay, everybody, you guys all figure it out. Plus you have to open again. So if you think about it, if I'm forced to be closed, then everyone who I have to pay money to that I haven't been, because I had zero revenue, is sitting there going like, well, this sucks for you. It sucks for me. It sucks for all of us. I'm like, great. Yeah, we're all in this together. The second we could open, I started getting phone calls. And people started saying, are you going to choose to be closed still? And I'm like, well, that's a different set of words. It's different when I'm, talking to my landlord, if he's saying like, are you closed because this is what we're all forced to do? Or are you closed because you don't want to open for whatever reason? Yeah. And the implications of that went down the line. To reopen again, to pivot, as everyone says, to say like make all these different adjustments. Everything costs money. So we were holding on to whatever we had just because we're like, we don't know how long we need it to last, assuming we had anything. And then, there's like, okay, well, I mean, I have to reopen. I have to. Because first of all, or I can just commit Harry Carey right now and just I could wrap this all up today and nobody would blame me. They're just like, look, I tried. And if but the crystal ball didn't go farther than 5 days in advance.
Right.
So
not even 5. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of crazy. And I mean, the example that's more close to me than say the spirits brand, which most of our business is on premise, so hugely impacted by that. Right. But we can just simply operate a different way to some degree or not, just basically having almost no business going. But my parents, I got my Barcelona shirt here. So my parents own the Barcelona Motel, for all of these you don't know. I mean, it was the same in New Jersey, and New York, New Jersey, obviously massively impacted very quickly. And it was a lot of the same lack of information. And, you're talking about opening a motel up, right? Opening an entire infrastructure of a seaside resort that goes to 250,000 people when it peaks out a day in the summer, right? So it was like, well, you can't open until June 1. So they missed Memorial Day, right? And it was like last minute, okay, now you can open at 60%. But imagine you're opening a motel on a day's notice with new rules in effect that you sort of were communicated. And then you expect guests to just show up instantaneously. Like that stuff is booked in advance, et cetera. So,
but it was the exact same thing with bars. Absolutely.
Yeah, right. Same thing.
And they talk about these limitations and things. They're like, oh, you can open to 25%. I'm like, there's no guarantees I'm opening to anything.
Right.
Because it still remains true that people are not going to do what they used to do. So they'd say these numbers like they meant something. They're like, okay, and 7 days later, they're like, now you can open to 50%. We're like, what does that mean?
Right.
It doesn't mean anything. And it certainly doesn't mean that I'm going to have enough money. It's to operate. Like I would rather be closed and have to work that out than to be able to have all these limitations, including the fear and anxiety of myself and my own staff. Are like, who are these people and what are they doing in our building?
Right.
If
first of all, you've got the element of what are the rules and understanding the rules. Second, you've got the demand factor, right? Like what are people going to do? And you've got two pieces of that. One is fear of interaction in a certain way, right? But then the other is just information. Like the assumption is, to your point, you make one announcement and everybody's just going to go back to doing what they do, or they're going to follow those guidelines and understand it. And they'll know that they can go back. And it just doesn't work that way, right? So
but they didn't know if they should go back or not.
Right.
So the ones that came out most vigorously were the ones who had least belief in the process. They're the ones who thought either they thought it was over and we beat it, or they thought it was foolish in the first place for what we've done. So it was literally 90% of the people that you would see. I'm like, okay, you're out here because you don't want to be safe. You don't want to sanitize your hands. You don't want to socially distance. You don't want to wear a mask. And it was all fun and games until about 10 days in it, entire bar crews started getting sick in Houston, where I am. And it started out as a rumor, and then we were confirming it. And then, it went from, in the beginning of that 10 days, you talk to bartenders, they're like, actually, this isn't a big deal. I don't even know anyone who got sick. And at the end of that 10 days, everyone knew at least 2 people who worked in bars. Like, we knew whole bar teams who tested positive, some of whom got very sick. And it was happening quickly, and it was happening all over. And then it kind of, like, the week before we finally shut down again, you can see all these numbers spiking in Houston. And this is where the story is going. We shut down voluntarily because one of my very small crew at this point, one of them had been exposed to someone who tested positive. He didn't test positive. He didn't have any symptoms, but all of a sudden we had to face this thing that everyone now knows what it feels like. Where we're like, well, what are we supposed to do now? So what if it's okay? I was in a car with a guy who eventually tested positive. I'm like, okay, that seems like we should check. Right. But okay, what if I was in a car with someone whose girlfriend tested positive? I'm like, okay, that's one step further out. What about if her grandfather was sick, and she'd seen him the night before? Like, on and on and on. And I'm sitting there going, like, and it was there with the staff. I'm like, we don't know. We don't know. No one knows. No one tells us. And so we decided to just cut it off for the week and try to figure out if we could, like, figure out a way to be safer or something. And so I recorded this video. Really what I was doing was recording it to tell people who might have come here that we're not doing it. Like, we're closing, and here's why. But, I just ended up kind of verbalizing this message to the governor of Texas. And it started out that way. I was like, you're leaving us to die. You're leaving us here with nothing. In fact, the help you tried to give us wasn't even really help. So this is actually making it worse. And that one statement kind of led out to just elucidating all these implications for cities, for communities, for people, for, what bars are, what bartenders are, what's going to happen to us, where are we going to go? Like, all of these things just came from that one simple statement where you're like, I'm going to sit right here and I'm going to look at what happens if this card falls in this house of cards. And then I'm going to see how far that extends. And it turns out it extends very far.
Yeah, I agree. Let's talk a little bit about Tiki. So the risk of bars is kind of identified the risk of Tiki.
Yeah, and that's why and one of the very big general risks is the risk to culture, right? A culture of all sort, and Tiki is aspirational, right? And I'm not going to speak to what Tiki should be or shouldn't be. And that's why I'm actually, some of the slides I put together and then some of the toys I put out, and this is something that I kind of learned in when I was in Tiki by the Sea in Europe, or at least I kind of started thinking of it in a different way, right? Because remember the Forest Tiki guy, was his name?
Forest Tiki?
Yeah, he's the Austrian dude. This was 2 years ago in Europe.
Oh, yeah. I can't remember his name off the top of my head now.
Right.
But I'm terrible at that.
But he'd made this book where it was just kind of like this. I think it's German, but it was just like these kind of.
You talking about Yoku?
I think so.
Explorer?
Yes. Right, but it's we basically created a whole environment for the month of December, which was we made the whole bar into a Nightmare Before Christmas bar. So we created this entire fantasy world, and I looked at it because it was so thorough, and I was like, shit, we just made ourselves into a Tiki bar. It just didn't reflect the kind of culture that you would expect from Tiki, right?
Right.
It didn't reflect anything from the Polynesian culture. It was different kind of style of drink, but it was all very much the same thing. And that, I think,
as a construct and brought to life and creating something engaging in that way.
And that, I think, is the major risk to Tiki in general, because Tiki is a lifestyle. Tiki is an attitude. Those things can still remain, but Tiki still has a community, and communities need places. Like the launch pad for so many of those things for people in that lifestyle are Tiki bars. You don't necessarily just want to go to the beach and set up your own grass hut and try to make your own cocktails. You want to go and you want to, it's not professionalized so much. It's specialized. And that's where, and that's what, and the risk to bars is the exact same thing. That's the risk to culture, because you could say the same thing about the music industry. You could say the same thing certainly about like cocktails and cocktail thought. It's not as important as far on a cultural aspect, I think, but it's getting increasingly so. And the question is always going to be how am I going to maintain a fantasy lifestyle when the fantasy becomes the bar itself? Right now, the aspirational thing that I'm going for isn't to go outside of a bar onto a beach. It is to go off of a beach into a bar.
That's an interesting dichotomy, for sure.
Right. Yeah. So the entire idea of what we're even trying to aim at and the fantasy we're trying to create almost it disobviates its own idea. It turns everything backward. I mean, right now, everything to do with bars and spirits is backwards. and we're all facing in a very, very different direction. And, to be able, everything that we're doing and everything we're saying is trying to preserve the culture that we have right now in bars. So we have something to go back to. So we have something we can aim at. And Tiki is very much a part of that, right? Because there was a burgeoning Tiki scene, and it's something people still really really loved learning about. This loved learning to loved participating in. But if we don't have bars, then we definitely don't have Tiki bars.
Right.
And that's
yeah.
But there's no way to overstate that. And a lot of people say, it's just one bar goes away. It happens all the time. Bars close all the time. Like, okay, I mean, it's not easy to open a bar. It's not easy to open a bar that anyone wants to go to. Imagine the vacuum that will be 40% of all the independent bars in less than 12 months. What's going to replace them is probably going to not be cool little Tiki bars.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple things. One is, I think you're talking about Jochen Hirschfeld, who did the DVD on Tiki. He's
Yes.
kind of an explorer and kind of a cultural archaeologist, if you will.
Yes.
Quite an interesting character. What's up, Jochen, if you happen to catch this at some point. One thing I think that is interesting about the Tiki concept, I guess two pieces of what you just said. One is there are a lot of home Tiki bars, right?
Yep.
Which are fairly elaborate. But I think almost without fail kind of miss a couple elements. One is that interaction factor, that engagement factor of the community around you, the people around you, the vibe. And the other is kind of the depth of the creativity of it, right? So even though there are some certainly kind of fairly advanced home Tiki bartenders, it's certainly not progressing the conversation in the same way that is happening with this resurgence that we've seen. And I've seen it all around the country.
Right.
In our travels, and it's really exciting. And to me, that kind of bridges into the other piece, which is, I think, a really interesting question. Like, there's been so much evolution over the last 5-10 years of the bar universe, the experience aspect, the evolution of riffing on classics, the creation of new ideas, new old things like Tiki, but where's it going? How does it relate to the modern world? Savory cocktails, things like that. I'm really curious as to, with that gap, and hopefully it's not as bad as we're talking about, but it's going to be bad, right? No matter what at this phase, how much of that creativity is stymied, how much is lost, how does that continue on,
Right. And not, I know what you're saying, and I know why you're saying it. And you could say the same thing about people who make cocktails just in general at home. Mm. Lots of people have great, little bars in their basements, and lots of people make cocktails all the time at home, and that's fantastic. That is not, you're right. It's not a driver of innovation necessarily, and not a driver of creativity. It almost can't be, unless someone is so deeply committed to spending the amount of money that you have to be able to innovate. And to be able to think about things enough and experience enough things to say, I even can create an innovation that would count as an innovation, not just some kind of change that I do in my house, But the real power of Tiki is that interaction with the people and the place. Tiki is a little more unique because Tiki has a community that's really, really committed and self-identified. So it carries its regulars around with it almost, right? So, but those are the functions of like, those are the things around a cocktail that is the reason why people want to drink them in bars in the first place. Those are the things that we don't train on very often, but if you do it long enough, you just kind of pick it up. And those are the things that I talk to bartenders about all the time when I talk about cocktails, and I've talked about it here, where I'm like, we are a critical component of our own cocktails. We are not practically an ingredient. We are an ingredient. And without that ingredient, you can't really pass a certain level. And it's almost impossible to pass it at home.
Right.
And that has to do with neurology. It has to do with psychology, and it has to do with belief. So without those things in place, you can only go so far. I mean, it's just like with the pandemic. People were making cocktails at home. They had videos. They had Dave Wondrich himself would stream, and you could watch him, and he'd walk you through making a cocktail in your house, and you're like, wow, that's amazing. Dave Wondrich just did this with me. And you still drink it, and you're like, I would still rather drink it at a bar. I still rather would.
Fair enough.
Because we're trying to.
One thing is drinking a beer at a shitty bar with Dave Wondrich is a great time.
It's a wonderful time. It's and experiencing the dive bars that he loves is a wonderful time.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
But he can drink a beer in his house. He could make his basement look like El Bate in Puerto Rico, and that doesn't substitute for being there. It's just like it's like watching porn instead of having sex. Like, I suppose they're related.
Fair analogy. Not that I've seen porn,
Oh yeah, no. I mean, I watched a video once on about pornography.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
No. I had to pay a lot of money for it. Yeah, but I mean, but that's not a bad analogy. You can it's something you're like, look, this is what I have right now, and this is as close as we can get. So fine. But that's the only thing you'll ever be able to do at home, except on rare occasions. The bar is special, and cocktails in bars are special, is because this is what we do for a living. This is our purpose. And because of that, we put all of the ingredients around them that you can't do it at home. And if you did, why would you? It would cost somebody once when the PDT cocktail book came out. I think it was New York Magazine or somebody. They did a time and money map to make one of those cocktails. So they're like, how far did I have to drive to go out and get all the ingredients, because there's some esoteric stuff? How much money did I have to spend to buy all those ingredients? How much time did it take me to make these cocktails? It was like 3 days and like $175 to make a drink that you could go to PDT, and everyone's like, oh my God, it's $17 here. I'm like, well, it's not $175.
I'll have to find that link. That sounds fairly entertaining. Let's click over. I think this is what you're referencing here.
That's exactly what I'm referencing there. And I think that's also where that was my Nightmare Before Christmas Tiki, by the way.
Right.
But that kind of aspirational creation, some people have the power to do, some people have the money to do, some people have the skill and the creativity and the will. But there will always be people who do that. Some people screen print their own t-shirts too, but most people just buy them. So, the barrier of entry to get into Tiki is already pretty high. So you have to be interested enough to get into it in the first place. If nothing else, you got to buy all those Hawaiian shirts, right? So the self-identifying stuff still takes time, effort, money, thought. And, so already you're talking about getting into a culture that costs, not zero. If you have to create your own Tiki bar out of nothing, just to have it in your house, to have that experience, it becomes nearly impossible. And if we still can't gather, then, we can't go to the Tiki bar, but I'm not going to your house either.
Right. That's fair. Yeah.
And it's also assuming you would invite me. And that's the other thing, is a bar is a place anyone can go. So I have to be able to make friends with you enough for me to get invited over your house in the first place, in a bar, or if I'm experienced as a city or whatever else, or if I just want to see, like, there's a new person in here making new drinks. Like, what are those drinks like? This is, all of that is like just the barest amount of the risk factor. And that's just a risk factor to the cultural part of it, not to mention the financial part or the economic part, or even just the idea that a community, including a tiki, especially a tiki bar, like a tiki bar has its third place built in. You can find a list of them and all around the world, and people, participate, and the regulars are the ones who pass those lists around. So it's kind of like that melding of two worlds that we talked about in the beginning, because the regulars of a tiki bar are all the tiki heads all around the planet. They just don't go to a specific bar all the time. So that is that community, that is those regulars, and you can find your way into it, and you can get accepted, even if you don't meet someone, or even if you see them only once a year at a conference or something.
Right. Well, now that we doom and gloom, let's talk a little bit about the future here. What hope for the future?
Yeah, there is none.
Great. And
nice talk. We were sitting around waiting for people to save us. Our governments and our elected officials, and maybe our partners, all the brands we propped up and built up for so many decades. We're waiting for someone to come and say, like, okay, you guys need some help. We should probably give you a hand. And we waited and we waited and we waited, and they're still not helping. So the hope for the future is the fact that we're now kind of looking around at each other and saying we have to create the circumstances of our own salvation.
Right.
And that is hopeful, because if we can do it, then we come out coordinated in a way that we haven't ever had to be before. There's 7. What do they say? How many? I don't know. There's a ton of bartenders in the country. There's like something like 700,000 bartenders. And there's
kind of right to me.
And the economic impact of even the 65 to 67,000 bars in the United States, and these are just bars, regular old bars. It's in the it's in the multi-billions of dollars. So as an industry, we have a lot of power and we have a lot of say if we start to coordinate. We never really did it before because we wanted to be pirates in our own little pirate ships, just kind of floating along, doing our own thing. That's what we do. I didn't get into this business to be in a club with other people. I want to make cool bars that I like, and other people like them too. If you don't like my bars, that's cool, because other people do it a different way right down the street. That's what the bar business is and has been. We have to, and so we've started to identify all these different channels where we can kind of start to make an impact in this particular situation. But if we do that, then all of a sudden we can look at all the other situations. And there's a lot, right? There's, bars reflect society. So society's problems are baked into the bar industry itself, and as society progresses, so do bars. And so inclusivity is a massive issue right now, and it needs to be addressed. Misogyny always has been an issue. It needs to be addressed. Like, all of these things are in it, but we can't fix something that disappears. So if it's gone, then we can't fix it. So if we can manage to get to the point where we can save as many bars as possible to maintain a culture for when we get back, immediately, and say, okay, we're already here, we're already talking, we're already together. Let's take a look at these other issues and see, like, if we can at least make some progress from them at the same time. But they all require the same thing, which is all of us coordinating, and that is from the highest of the star tender to the brand new barback who started in the business 6 months ago. The entire pantheon of everyone here needs to do something, because if we don't, then the opposite is also true. If we sit around and play video games and take pictures of our food and don't make the phone calls and don't coordinate and don't offer our time and our shares and our likes and all those things, then we cannot complain 6 months from now, 6 days from now, when you're like, well, my unemployment's gone, my bar's not open anymore, and either I'm going to real quick try to find a whole brand new career right now, or I'm going to be homeless and have to move back in with my parents who probably also lost their job. P.S. I have to quarantine for 2 weeks to do that. Like, every single one of us is going to have to make those choices, but every single one of us is affected by the existence of bars in America. Like, every single one of us, from the brands to the distributors to the people who wash the linens to the people who work in the bars, everybody.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about your figure of 700,000 or whatever it may be is, as somebody who my business is basically done at bars, right? So
Right.
mid-March, everything shuts down. You know, April, we might as well not have been in business, honestly,
Right.
from an effective amount of cases that I ship to distributors, right? And so it's interesting to think about. It's not just everybody who works there. It's also the entire ecosystem, to your
Right.
point, distributors, of brands, of suppliers, of food vendors, of all these different people that are a part of this that need to make this work somehow in the midst of all this. And then, you know, tertiary, it's to your point, it's these people who are missing out on this experience that is such an integral part of being human, right? For a
Right.
number of people, right? So I think there was this, you know, initial shock of like, wow, this whole thing might have just fallen apart. And then soon after, I think a number of people, and you're going to get into some of the things you guys are up to, but we're like, all right, how do we just get through it? First of all, like
Right.
survival mode, which is still a good chunk of my day. Secondarily, how do we pivot and make it work, right? But where are we going? How do we make it work even beyond this? Even let's say we're back, how do we make this thing work better? How do we work better together? How do we have less ego, less bullshit, because we're all trying to do something and advance a thing together, right? So I've seen that attitude has changed a lot in my personal interactions. I hope that stays, you know? I hope that we can navigate it together. I hope that some of these initiatives stick around. I hope that some of the ways we do things different stick around. But also, I really hope that those attitudes, which are fairly useless and very self-serving, go away as well, because it really doesn't help anybody. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that's, I mean, we have to think more for sure, because this is such a unique kind of time in business and in governance and in life, like all those things. And it's a very strange time to be in, because anyone who's ever had a crystal ball is just as right as anyone who's never had one. So my opinion of what the second phase or second world looks like is just as accurate as, you know, the people who forecast, you know, locations for Danny Meyer's restaurants, right? You know, they went to school for it and they have a whole career based on it. I have a different career based on other stuff, but it's like no one knows. And I think that's where a lot of the stasis comes from. But that stasis is also affecting us. So we're sitting here, and a lot of us are still sitting around going like, you know, who's coming? And the answer remains no one.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about, go ahead.
No.
To me, this is a good time to talk about supporting the effort, right?
Sure.
So tell us a bit more about that.
So, I mean, and this is something that I hope everyone listens to, and I hope everyone spreads, because my main evangelism now is all of this. And it's never been about what I'm saying. It's been what everyone is saying. And the more people who say it, the better it is. So finding some way to support is critical. And if it's a support in a tip jar, that's wonderful if you can do that. But we're all bartenders, and a lot of us aren't working. So what is almost equally valuable right now is time, attention, and sharing.
Yep.
Something like 250,000 times by now. And that's the kind of thing where you look at it and you can take that number of eyeballs and do any number of things with it. And it just steamrolls into something that may at some point, and hopefully will at some point, force someone to say, there's so many people right now saying the same thing. Someone should probably pay attention. So, you know, I talk about a lot of that on my kind of podcast and YouTube channels. So if anyone is not caught up on what exactly is going on in bars in general, because now I'm talking to bartenders across and bar owners across the country, I have a podcast that talks about a lot of this at the Cottonmouth Club Presents.com. And we do have the YouTube channel where all the videos are. That's another way of tipping and supporting, is finding channels like that and clicking the little button with the thumb and sharing it or subscribing. Like those things, like the more people pay attention, the more people it gets in front of, and then it steamrolls, and that's what everybody needs right now. And and for what is becoming an increasingly national discussion about it, not just the philosophy of this whole thing, but the execution, our nightly live stream, which is at the Cottonmouth Club on Instagram, has become a place where we're having a national conversation about what's happening and what might happen in the future. So the last 2 nights, we found out what was going on in Ohio. Night before that, it was Nebraska. We talked to people all over the country. Tonight, Robin Robinson and I are kind of like going to try to start crystal balling the future. We're like, what's going to happen? Because someone's got to have at least that kind of conversation so we know what we're even planning. And then, something like Thirst Group, which your partner, Nate Whitehouse, is one of the founding members of, like, those are things that are real, boring legislative slogs. Like the real activism and that's the kind of change that is systemic. That work needs to start too. And Thirst Group is doing a great job at that. Independent Restaurant Commission is doing a great job at that. But every single one of those groups needs anyone who is anywhere touching this business, go sign up and just say, look, I'm here for you. Because one day I'm going to come to everyone in Tiki by the Sea alumni and say, on Tuesday, we all need to send this email that says this to this person. I need your help. And I need to know when that happens, 1 million people will do that. And 1 million isn't really that many if you think about all the people in the country who are touched by this business.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just reading about that in digital marketing speak. They like to talk about the thunderclap of like really making an impact like that. But, I think you're right. I think the reality is a lot of this stuff is extremely boring. It's like painstaking, slow lobbying, getting information out there. It moves at the speed of government, or even worse, because there's so little actual certainty of what's going to happen anyway.
Right.
And, for us, even on a micro level as a company, it's like survival. It feels like watching a glacier move, right? You're just like, yeah, it's moving slowly in the right direction, but, why can't we move it faster? It's just really like attempting to do something like that in the midst of this, I think is not really possible. So it's like the long, hard, slow work of getting the word out, making impactful change, and keeping that as we move ahead with it.
Yeah, and I mean I compare it a lot to. I mean I use vivid imagery for a reason. It's like if I'm hit by a car and I go to the emergency room, the doctor tells me to stop smoking. I'm like, yeah, I get it, and we'll work on the smoking. But like, I just lost my arm. Like, staunching the bleeding right now is how I put it, and it's very, very accurate. Like, so I think of it in 3 phases. There's the triage, which is like we need to stop something right now. There's the short term, which is like let's figure out what to do, but in the short term until we figure out what to do in the long term, and also the long term stuff. Something like Thirst Group is that long haul, and it does need to be done, but it does take an enormous amount of time. There are mechanisms of triage. We have to make them point them at us, but because they're there, but it, but it has to happen because every day that goes by, there's another bar, and many of them will be tiki bars. Like imagine Brother Clee's talk next year. Like just thinking about it, like brings tears to my eyes. The number of places that he talks about kicking off Tiki by the Sea every year that will not be there anymore. It could have been there if someone had intervened.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough. Well, shall we make some cocktails here?
I mean, I could use one.
So we'll do a quick thank you to our sponsor, which is Beam. So De Kuiper, Neff is going to be using butter shots here, and Jim Beam Black will be a part of this. And then you want to talk about the drink for a second here? Me.
I very much do. Let me make an adjustment real quick so people can see what I'm doing. There we go. Dope. So this drink is I'm making specifically in honor of Gary Regan because right now, and it's not the first time I've thought this. I'm not the first person who said it. Like Gary's voice in the bartender community was very, very loud, and it was very important. And Gary right now would be saying in a much, much nicer and more and smarter and more intelligent and more coherent way all the things that I'm saying, because Gary loved bartenders. And I miss him all the time because he was a wonderful man. But I miss him so much right now because we need that kind of person right now who's going to protect us, not just the bars, but the bartenders. And Gary was always that guy. So I want to do that. This is from Gary's book, the Joy of Mixology, and it kind of should remind people of a time they probably never saw, which was like 80s and 90s, drinking all these crazy cocktails. And this is one of them. And that's why I was excited about the butterscotch schnapps, because this is definitely like something that people wouldn't necessarily think to stock in their fancy cocktail bar. But I think we should start looking at these things again, because there's a reason why these cocktails existed. And there is a way to make sure that they're still modern and elevated and delicious, but also still fun. And so to kind of put some mixology in it, I make an Irish cream, which is, it's always better to make your own as far as Irish cream goes, because it's really delicious, and you can use whatever kind of whiskey you want. So I made a Kentucky cream this time, and I think we have that recipe posted somewhere, right?
We do, yeah. It's in your newsletter via email, and then we can also share it out if anybody wants to reach out to us.
Yeah, and if anyone has questions about it, I'll definitely tell you. But that's the Irish cream, Kentucky cream that we made. And Kentucky cream is just a word I made up. I don't know if that's an actual thing.
It's a good word. I bought it.
There's a little bit of Jägermeister in there, and that's also very much in honor of Gary Regan, because he would have he was a big fan. The original recipe called for cinnamon schnapps. I made a cinnamon syrup, which had a 24-hour steep, and then we're going to add butterscotch schnapps. And so this, I kind of made it into like a tiki style, and it was because of the fact that I have this super cool Star Wars tiki mug.
Yes, excellent. Big fan.
And so I wanted to make it kind of a crushed ice, like tiki, tiki looking. And so we're putting the tiki all in the kind of aspiration. So we still do have there's a story, and good tiki drinks always have a story. So I'm filling that with crushed ice. And because this is a crushed ice drink, you don't want to over dilute it. So I'm just going to put a little bit in this shaker and do what my brother calls a whip shake. And that's just to aerate it, give it a little minor dilution. And half of this drink is in the tasting. The rest of it is in the garnishing. So the original name of this drink that I adapted was the oatmeal cookie. There we go. And
if you guys are taking this along at home, please do post it up. Tag us at Tiki by the Sea and J hashtag Tiki by the Sea. Would love to share it out with people. Have people.
So the original recipe had raisins as a garnish, but I also wanted to add. I'm pretty literal sometimes, so I'm going to add a little.
Oh, wow.
And that is the cocktail.
Lovely. I need one of those.
And like I said, I could use it, so I'm gonna do the honors right here. Cheers.
Hey, nobody's judging here.
Ah,
very well done.
It tastes like the 90s. Tastes like the early days of my career.
Where were you working in the 90s? Quick question.
Seattle. I started in Seattle. So,
Right.
yeah, I actually am a little unusual in that even in those days, Seattle, especially the bar industry, that a lot of people don't know, it was probably the best place for bars in the country at the time. A lot of that was the influence of Murray Stenson. A lot of it was the culinary influence, but I've never, from the first day I worked in a bar, ever worked in a bar that didn't have fresh juice. It's not common for someone who started in that time to say never once have done that. But yeah, I was in Seattle for 5 years, then moved to New York, and the rest is history.
There you go. Well, fantastic. Thank you, sir. We'll show
Thanks
you
for having me.
Info here. So stay in touch. Miguel at mjneff.com, at Cocktail Whisperer. Again, a reminder, if you're in a place to do so, the tip jar at Venmo is at the Cottonmouth Club -staff. It's much appreciated. That's a photo of you making a paper plane at Tiki by the Sea.
This
Love
is
that.
true.
That was a lot of fun. All right. We are going to bring in Mr. Bob Wagner into our chat here. Bob, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Pete?
You're kind of low. Let's bring that volume up a little.
Oh, my apologies. Is that better?
There it is. All that equipment.
All that equipment. Now, I turned it down so I wouldn't interrupt your fantastic conversation with Michael. Good to see you as always. We used to work together briefly, and actually, fun fact, he likely served me one of my first proper cocktails at the Panther Room at Cyclops in Seattle, which
Wow.
we definitely discussed when we were drunk one night in New York.
You're muted, Neff. Let's get you unmuted. No? Well, we'll bring him back in. Let's move into our 5 questions, Wagner. You ready for your 5 questions?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, here we go. You're in the hot seat.
All right.
Favorite cocktail?
I think I'm unmuted.
You're unmuted. Welcome back. Panther
Thanks.
Club. Good times?
Panther Room.
Panther
Panther
Room.
Room. Panther Room.
There's the Panther Room. They always wanted. That was John's thing. He was desperate for people to call it the Panther Room, and no one ever did.
Mm.
We just called it the Cyclops.
It was a Cyclops. The Ace Hotel, the very first Ace Hotel, is upstairs.
Oh yeah, that's why I hate the Ace Hotel so much.
And that's where I worked at the Ace Hotel in New York before I came to work for you at Holiday.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, Bob. I remember you worked there.
John
Yeah,
Dory.
It opened.
John Dory, you were coming in there with Sasha, eating lobster rolls.
Yeah, it opened.
Being very nervous.
The first Ace opened like 6 months after we opened, so we were the de facto bar in the hotel, and we're like, I remember looking around. I'm like, what are you doing? Yeah, whatever. I should say nice things, not bad things.
There you go. All right, back to Bob.
Right on.
Favorite cocktail? Go.
Mai Tai. Always.
All right. What's your spec?
Oh, I gotta be weird. So Orgeat, Giffard, since I work for them. Dry curacao, also Giffard, since I work for them. Fresh lime juice. And then those tweak based on the sugar content of the rums. So I always like to do 1.5 dark, half white overproof, and I'll move around. I generally like to go with something grass-based, like your Ambarana.
Good choice.
So like if I'm going dark, like 1.5 Ambarana, and then a half ounce of like rum bar overproof white, right? So a funky Jamaican. But if I did 1.5 of like rum bar gold, then I might do a half ounce of an overproof agricole. And then depending on what I can find, you switch out basically like a pot still Jamaican and a grassy agricole or cachaça. Based on that sweetness, you kind of tweak. I like it dry, so half ounce orgeat, half ounce curacao is about where I want to go. Crushed ice, all the garnishes, orchid, spent lime wheel, cinnamon stick on fire, mint sprigs, cocktail parasol, everything.
Great. All right. Favorite Tiki by the Sea memory?
Positive memory. The first time Michael Neff made a paper plane for everyone and then threw it out, and you saw the collective disheartening of every kid who had just enough little tattoos to call it a sleeve, trying to be like, but no, like this is how I make my paper plane. And Michael's like, no one gives a shit how you make a paper plane. No one wants to stare at the top of your head for 4 minutes, because it was like 6 weeks of training with him at Holiday distilled into 6 minutes of the beginning of the first time he presented.
Well, since you mentioned it, you want to explain the purpose of that?
Yeah. So it's funny, working for Michael, it was very much a bunch of guys and girls who had worked at dive bar, and then a craft bar, and then we're at Holiday, and we're told no one cares what your spec is. Just make a good drink with eye contact and engage, and don't only talk to your friends, talk to the people that came here because they don't have someone to talk to. Like, your friends rolled in 10 deep. They have people to talk to. Introduce the guy in the corner that might like the same kind of music to the group of people over here, or and vice versa, right? Like, be a connector, be a social engineer. And it all went back to Michael opening Clifton Cafeteria, and specifically a tiki bar within Clifton Cafeteria, where the drink recipes were like the fifth, maybe sixth thing that mattered to being successful in LA, where you have, you know, the controversially the birthplace of the American tiki bar, which is where tiki bars came from. There's some argument over, you know, Don the Beachcomber versus Trader Vic, but you got Tiki Tea, where legitimately people will come in and drink crappy canned beer, but they had the little mechanical, what was
The
that
little bowl.
Yeah, the little mechanical bull, and everyone had like a whole organized dance and song routine that went along with the mechanical bull. And you know, people would get bad reviews if they tried to open a tiki bar, but it wasn't brown enough. That was always my favorite term. Like, there's not enough wicker and rattan and rope. So yeah. And I think this goes back to what you were saying with aspirational escapism. People don't go to tiki bars just because you have the right. And that's always what's fascinating when you go to like a really great craft cocktail bar and someone makes a great Mai Tai, but they serve it in like a rocks glass with no garnishes. Like,
Right.
It's not like I can make a great Mai Tai at home and I'll waste the money on the garnishes just for me. And I'll put on Brother Cleave's band. You know, I'll put on Combustible Edison and I'll turn the lights down low and listen to that kind of music to drink that drink with that garnish. Yeah, well, because I was a tiki consumer long before I had anything to do with your organization or bartending. I mean,
right. All right. Next question. Describe South Jersey. South Jersey.
South Jersey is America's melting pot. It is everything. I grew up in Florida, and it's like where everyone that lives in Florida since they invented air conditioning must have come from. You know, never
elaborate. You nailed it.
Yeah.
All right. Weirdest Wildwood experience.
Trying to explain to grown adults why you don't take beer from a stranger that walked out from the dark at 1 o'clock in the morning on the beach, who are all industry professionals.
Interesting. Who is the stranger?
I don't know. And
he tried that's why you don't take a beer off him.
He tried to introduce himself, and I told him I had no interest in knowing who he was.
Amazing.
I just told him to go away.
Okay. What do you miss the most about Steva Casey? Hi, Steva.
I miss her rapier wit.
Oh.
I miss when we finally get the Wildwood sign photo done, sharing an ice cream cone.
Oh, it's a fave.
Four bros.
We get that very brief window where it's just us and ice cream before we meet everyone at the boardwalk.
I love Scream now. I thought your weirdest Wildwood moment was going to be when we were doing loadout.
Nope. I wasn't going to bring that up.
No, we got to hear it. This sounds great.
The
husband took his shirt off when he threatened to kick my ass, right?
The whole experience
yeah.
was we were packing everything up. It was our last night. This was 18, Bob?
Yep.
Yeah. And this woman just wanders onto the property of the Barcelona. Everyone's left. It's Tuesday night, and we are packing everything. All of our equipment, we're loading it out so that we can store it for the next year. And this woman just walks up, and it's a cool 1 a.m. And she starts to have a conversation with Bob and I about how she is out for the night and where should she go. And then like she's clearly a drunk person who's just like wandering around Wildwood Crest. And, you know, as Bob said, he grew up in Florida. I grew up in Alabama. And we grew up going to Panama City as the beach that we went to. So I'm used to some Florida shenanigans. But I'm not used to like just like random, like Wildwood Crest is essentially sleepy beach town. Not some Florida shit doesn't happen there. So it was a 30-minute conversation where we were going to call her a cab, and then her husband just showed up.
And he really thought we were having like group sex with her or something nefarious. And Evie's there. He just chimed in. I mean, we're all fully clothed, just having a standing, 4 or 5, 6 feet apart. Like, I don't know what he thought was going on. Yeah.
It was an interesting experience, to say the least.
So he tried to fight you, is what you're saying.
He didn't
fight you?
No actual fists were thrown. But I thought that Marv and Bob were going to have to lay hands at one point.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was great. It was a great time.
That sounds great. I wish you guys had a video that we could share with the crowd.
I wish your dad would have been awake, because I feel like it would have been nipped in the bud so much earlier.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. Awesome. All right, 5 questions. Tiki fan Bob, thanks for joining.
Thank you.
It's been real. Next week, we've got Bailey Pryor, founder and CEO of Real McCoy, along with Nathan Hazard, the National Brand Ambassador, talking transparency and alcohol labeling. Important topic. Would love to see more of it. So getting a little bit nerdy there. Should be exciting. Great product there. Thanks for joining. Last reminder, the tip jar, Venmo at the Cottonmouth Club -staff. Let's bring everybody back on here for a little goodbye. Been a pleasure. Thank you all.
Thank you guys so much. Thank everybody for coming. Yeah. And it's so good to see everybody on screen. You guys, I miss you guys.
Keep doing what you're doing.
Miss you too, Michael.
Love you, brother.
All right.